When we think of the spread of Islam, images of dramatic military conquests often spring to mind, particularly regarding early Arabia and Spain. However, the story of how Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, became overwhelmingly Muslim is a profound exception to this narrative. It was not primarily driven by the sword, but by centuries of patient, socio-economic, and spiritual osmosis. We must discard the simplistic notion that the faith was imposed overnight following decisive battles. Instead, we reveal a far more complex historical tapestry, one woven by traveling mystics, shifting demographics, economic necessity, and the gradual disintegration of old political structures. This documentary explores the peaceful, subtle, and ultimately successful process of the Islamization of Anatolia, beginning in the 11th century and solidifying over the next 400 years. Understanding this transformation requires peeling back layers of cultural integration rather than focusing solely on battlefield victories. Before the arrival of the Turkish tribes, Anatolia was the heartland of the Byzantine Empire, a Greek-speaking, Orthodox Christian civilization, sophisticated but often highly centralized and bureaucratically rigid. By the 10th and 11th centuries, however, the Byzantine presence in many interior regions was starting to wane due to internal conflicts, heavy taxation, and a general disconnect between the Constantinople elite and the peasantry. The mountainous regions, in particular, often felt neglected or exploited by the imperial administration. This pre-existing political and social fatigue created a vacuum, making the indigenous Christian population highly susceptible to new influences that promised stability or a fairer social contract. The initial nomadic Turkish incursions were not religious invasions aimed at conversion, but rather military migrations seeking better grazing lands and exploiting weakening borders, unintentionally setting the stage for deep cultural change. The Battle of Manzikert in 1071 is often cited as the singular event that opened Anatolia to the Turks, yet its significance lies not in mass conversion, but in permanently shattering the Byzantine military hegemony. Following this defeat, the Seljuks quickly established the Sultanate of Rum. Crucially, their initial rule was pragmatic, focusing on consolidating political control rather than immediate religious zealotry. They needed local administrators and workers, leading to policies of religious tolerance, especially towards those who paid the jizya tax. Instead of mass expulsions or forced conversions, Turkish migration into the interior was slow but continuous. This steady demographic shift gradually overwhelmed the existing populations, not through violence, but simply by increasing the overall Muslim presence in the region over several generations, slowly changing the cultural landscape of the villages and towns. Perhaps the most crucial, yet often overlooked element in this conversion process was the arrival and pervasive influence of Sufi mystics and wandering dervishes. Figures like Rumi, while famous for their poetic legacy, were part of a vast network of spiritual guides, often referred to as Babas and Ahis, who settled in villages and towns long before formal government structures were established. Unlike the formal, sometimes rigid, theological approach of urban ulema, the Sufis offered a deeply personal, adaptable, and emotionally resonant form of Islam. They communicated in the local vernacular, often incorporating familiar folk tales, poetry, and even existing devotional practices into their teachings, making the transition seamless and non-threatening to the local Christian and Hellenic populations. They didn't demand abandonment of all cultural memory. They provided a spiritual bridge, making Islamic monotheism palatable and immediately accessible to the Anatolian peasantry. Economic incentives played a powerful, undeniable role in encouraging conversion. Under Byzantine rule, key trade routes like the Silk Road sometimes suffered from heavy bureaucratic interference and instability. The Seljuks, recognizing the need for robust commerce, actively promoted trade by building massive stone caravanserai, literally palaces for merchants, every 30 to 40 kilometers along major routes. Furthermore, Muslim merchants were often granted preferential tax treatments and access to extensive Islamic credit networks stretching across Persia and Central Asia. For local Christian traders, converting to Islam meant instant integration into a hugely successful, globalized economic system, removing barriers and significantly boosting their prosperity. Over time, these pragmatic economic decisions eroded the religious difference between communities, making conversion an increasingly attractive proposition for material gain. Social integration was facilitated by mixed marriages and the fluidity of identity on the frontier. As Turkish communities settled, intermarriage between Turkish men and local Christian women became common, particularly in border regions where security was unstable. The children of these unions were raised in the dominant culture, which increasingly became Muslim. Furthermore, many Christians converted to escape the oppressive tax burdens, primarily the jizya, which, while not excessive, was a constant reminder of their second-class status. Crucially, the Seljuks and later the Ottomans often employed non-Muslims in high administrative roles, especially if they were skilled. But the social ceiling for advancement was inevitably higher for those who converted, creating subtle but persistent pressure over generations. It was a societal drift, where being Muslim slowly became synonymous with being a fully integrated member of the ruling society. The perception of justice also played a critical role in the appeal of the new Islamic rulers compared to the old Byzantine system. The Byzantine legal structure was often seen by the Anatolian commoner as distant, slow, and overly reliant on elite interests in Constantinople. In contrast, Islamic Sharia law, administered by local qadis, judges, often offered a speedier, more accessible, and in many localized disputes, a seemingly fairer resolution. This was particularly true for the vulnerable, who sought protection from corrupt local barons or exploitative landlords. While modern understanding of Sharia is complex, in the medieval context, it represented a unified system tied directly to the religious authority of the new state. This perception of accessible justice provided a strong governmental reason for alignment with the new faith, cementing the legitimacy of the Seljuk and Ottoman administrations in the eyes of the populace. The physical landscape itself reflected this peaceful assimilation through syncretic architectural styles. Early Seljuk and Ottoman mosques in Anatolia rarely followed purely Arabian prototypes. They often incorporated local materials, building techniques, and even decorative elements borrowed from Byzantine and Armenian Christian structures. We see mosques built within the shell of converted churches, yet the mosques themselves are adorned with intricate geometrical patterns and calligraphy that replaced but did not erase the old aesthetics entirely. Furthermore, the construction of massive educational institutions, hospitals, darush shifa, and charitable kitchens, imarets, demonstrated the commitment of the Islamic State to public welfare, funded by Waqf endowments. This visible infrastructure of care and learning demonstrated the functional superiority and permanence of the new order, encouraging conversion through proximity and patronage. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century paradoxically accelerated the Islamization process. While destructive, the Mongol defeat of the Sultanate of Rum led to political fragmentation and chaos, dissolving centralized authority. This meant the local Turkish beyliks, principalities, that emerged were highly localized and often relied heavily on religious legitimacy to govern in the absence of a strong sultan. The vacuum allowed the Sufi brotherhoods and Ahi guilds to become even more influential, acting as key stabilizers and sources of community trust when political governance failed. In this decentralized environment, conversion was entirely a local decision, often influenced by the dominant social or economic figures in the region, who were usually already Turkish Muslim settlers. The Mongols, being initially non-Muslim, inadvertently pushed the fractured Anatolian population closer to the indigenous Turkish Muslim groups for protection and identity. The slow, generational nature of conversion means that the Islamization of Anatolia was not complete until well into the Ottoman period, centuries after Manzikert. The rise of the Ottomans brought consolidation, replacing the fragmented beyliks with a powerful, singular empire. The Ottoman state institutionalized the religious structures inherited from the Seljuks, funding mosques, supporting the ulema, and reinforcing the idea that the Sultanate was the ultimate protector of the faith. Even as the empire expanded into Balkan Christian lands, Anatolia's transformation was already complete. The population had shifted so thoroughly that Turkish Muslim identity was now the definitive identity of the peninsula, sustained by continuous migration from Central Asia and the ongoing demographic reality that the Muslim population was simply outgrowing the Christian one. This Ottoman phase cemented the long, patient process into immutable historical fact. To conclude, the peaceful Islamization of Anatolia stands as a testament to the power of cultural exchange over brute force. It was a gradual demographic transformation facilitated by religious tolerance, economic opportunity, accessible justice systems, and, most powerfully, the flexible and appealing message of Sufi Islam. It reminds us that historical change is rarely simple or monochromatic. The transition took 5 centuries, involving generations of choices by individuals seeking economic stability, social acceptance, and spiritual fulfillment within a shifting political landscape. This process fundamentally altered the geopolitical map, creating the cultural and national identity of modern Turkey. It was a triumph not of conquest, but of profound, sustained sociological osmosis that deserves careful and nuanced study. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating religious and cultural transformations. We hope this exploration has provided a richer understanding of how complex historical change truly unfolds, far beyond the simplicity of battlefield narratives. If you found this documentary insightful and valuable to your understanding of history, please let us know in the comments below what other forgotten historical narratives you'd like us to explore. Your engagement fuels our work, allowing us to bring more detailed historical analysis directly to you. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates and to ensure you catch our next documentary release.